Jimmy Wallington here on what is about to be Monitor 62, inviting you to listen to Ben Grauer reminisce about all the New Year's Eves he's spent in Times Square, to hear a news resume of the week, and to join White House correspondent Ray Shearer for a prediction of the president's problems and plans for this coming year. And now, here's our Sunday night host, Frank McGee.
December 31st, 1961, just a few hours away from the new year, which will bring to each of us we know not what. Do you meet the new year with a shout and a whistle and a paper hat? Do you greet it as a wonderful blank page on which to write new and exciting things? Or are you thoughtful and pensive on New Year's Eve? Do you ponder a little seriously about what may lie ahead? Whichever type you are, there's one thing we wonder about you. If you were given an infallible crystal ball and allowed to see what will happen to you in the 365 days ahead, would you really look into it? Would you really want to see and know? Or would you rather go along meeting each day as it comes and in your heart expecting that something good, something unexpected may happen tomorrow? After all, isn't that part of the fun of life? No, I don't think I'd like to look into that infallible crystal ball. Do you really? All right, maybe one quick peek. Now here's Monitor.
Football's exciting postseason bowl games, including the Senior Bowl, Sugar Bowl, Orange Bowl, Cotton Bowl, and Pro Bowl, are coming your way on television. Brought to you by Delco DC-12 batteries, the dry charge battery with 100% fresh starting power.
For power, parts, and performance, simply say Delco. Look for the man who displays the United Delco sign.
A little later tonight, following an old NBC tradition, Ben Grauer will be over in Times Square to describe the coming in of 1962 in what is probably the most famous New Year's celebration in the world. Before he sets out tonight, we're going to ask Ben to tell us some of his experiences through the years as NBC's Mr. Times Square. I don't know whether he's ever been called that, but we're giving him the name now anyway. Ben, where in Times Square are you when you broadcast the midnight celebration?
It's the first time I've been called Times Square, Frank. Square, yes, frequently. Let's see, the position is on the marquee of the Hotel Astor. For those who don't know Times Square intimately, there's a triangle formed. The lower base of the triangle is the Times building at 43rd, and the apex of the triangle is about 6 blocks up at 47th Street. Right square in the middle is the famed Astor Hotel, a landmark since the 1900s. Toscanini stayed there when he first came to America, and so on. The marquee juts out over the plaza formed by the deserted streets, deserted of traffic, that is, and that's where we have our vantage point, about 30 or 40 feet above the crowd. No traffic is permitted in Times Square from approximately 10:30 on, when the crowds start to gather, 11 o'clock.
Well, you're right in the center of things. You
We're
see
in
it
the
all
center
from there.
and above. That's essential to get a vantage point, a bird's eye view.
It must seem awfully noisy to you right in the middle of it.
Noisy?
Uh-huh.
Frank, I've been into sheet and tube works in Pittsburgh where I heard 40-ton hammers banging away at steel. I've been in the belly of a ship as the motors were throbbing in the old days in steam days. And nothing parallels this surge of sound that starts to build around 10 minutes of, 15 minutes of 11.
I guess you can almost feel it physically beating against you.
Physically, it actually has an impact. So I've seen people wince when the climactic moment comes.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's, I suppose, as the ball on the Times Tower starts to drop.
Yes.
What happens to the crowd then?
Well, by tradition, let's first talk about that ball on the old flatiron-shaped building of the old Times building. The Times is now a block away, but it's traditionally the Times building. About 30 stories above the crowd, there is a pillar illuminated, a flagpole in lights, and at the top is a sphere with 100, 200 bulbs in it. At the moment of midnight, just maybe 3 seconds before, the bulb starts to move just a touch, and then at the precise instant, it slides down, this illuminated bulb. And that noise, which one had thought is indescribably at the peak, even goes higher. That extra roar is the thing that knocks it over.
Ben, how many years have you been reporting on New Year's Eve in Times Square?
Well, let's see. I've covered everything from eclipses in Brazil to surrenders and airlifts, but this one has gone on, whatever the world events is going to be sure of. I'd say, I'm not sure, but it's at least 20 years.
At least 20
At
years?
least 20. I know I did the one in 1939, so that's 39, 59. It's 22 years.
22. Do any of them stand out above the others?
There is I won't say monotony, there's a similarity with one notable exception. In the war years, the composition of the crowd suddenly became mostly military, understandably. And the one that I never will forget was the one in 1944, not 45, but from 44 turning to 45, as the Allied forces, and of course as the U.S. forces, felt that victory was in our grasp. D-Day was already 8 months old. It was plain to every observer that the Nazis were crumbling. The Japs were to be taken care of later, but there was that sense of, now we've got it in our hands. That was the maddest, the wildest, the most tremendous.
I understand you also covered VJ Day in Times Square. Now, there had been rumors of a big conference in Washington that day, and then the news of the armistice broke at 7 in the evening. And you broadcast for many hours after that as a crowd spontaneously gathered to celebrate in Times Square.
Yes, let's get the chronology. The big one in New Year's Eve was before VJ,
Yes,
the sense of anticipation.
Yeah, and this is
And
VJ
then August, what was it, August 14, I think. This was realization, and this had added to it the fact that there'd been a build-up for days, for 2 or 3 days after the 2 atom bombs and the negotiations in Switzerland and so on.
And some rumors.
And rumors, plenty of rumors. Even, I think, there was a false one, as there was in World War II, World War I.
World War I,
So the crowd had started to gather that afternoon. The mobile unit was assigned. I went down with the mobile unit. My impression is it was broad daylight, 5 or 6 o'clock. Did you say 7?
I think it was when the word came
Well,
from the
it
White
would
House
be.
that
With-
the armistice was...
With daylight saving in August, there still would be daylight, so that's right. And that audience, that crowd, was different from there's a frenetic, a frantic, desperate feeling to the midnight thing because it's so quick. It's all built up into those last 5 minutes. This just continued. I never saw so many girls kissed by so many guys whom they didn't know and enjoying it. Marines, I remember, were particularly, they landed and took over.
Yeah.
There were 2 Navy boys that climbed one of the flagpoles, one of the lighting fixtures, about 25 feet high, most perilous thing, and shinnied up there and saluted the crowd.
Great moment.
Mad moment.
Everything in this world, Ben, seems to get bigger every year. Do you expect the crowd to be at its biggest this year?
No, the crowds at Times Square, although big, are trending down from about 700, 800,000 down to about 500,000 or even 400,000. The tradition, I don't know why it built, whatever started the idea of coming to Times Square, but they used to flock in from all the city to there. Now people are getting a little more sophisticated, maybe a little more TVs keeping them home, and radio, family, whatever it is. There's a big crowd, but it's a very young crowd. These are kids.
Well, Ben, does the feeling of a giant crowd like that give you any kind of a strange feeling?
A very strange feeling. When you look at the crowd, you can't recognize faces. You just sense an impersonal mass. Many times as I've stood there, as the noise is building, the demonstration, I realize it's for nothing but meaningless expressions of joy, but suppose it were turned to political power. During the war, when Hitler and Mussolini were raging at their strongest, you sense the power of the mob, and you sense the thankfulness that we have never been subject to mob rule. The mob is an animal, and you see it at its fiercest, lashing its tail in a crowd like that.
It's bigger than the sum of its parts, isn't it?
That's right, and it's mindless.
Mm-hmm. In a state of hypnosis. Ben, one last question. Do you ever have trouble getting through the crowds to the place where you're supposed to be?
Frequently. There are two reasons. One, I never leave my family and friends in time. I'm always skinning in at the last minute, and then the crowd is building, and they say, "Hey, fella, Happy New Year," and grab me and try to make me a prisoner. So I have a torn coat or a button missing, but I make it.
A few little mementos over those 22 years. Good luck in getting there tonight, Ben, and we'll be listening in to you at midnight. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Frank.
And we'd also like to invite Monitor listeners to join NBC's All-Star Parade of Bands, which begins just 5 minutes after 11 tonight, Eastern Standard Time. You'll have a ringside table for the festivities with the live music of Count Basie, Harry James, Buddy Morrow, Gene Krupa, Ralph Martiri, Billy May, Lawrence Welk, Jerry Gray, Chico Hamilton, and Charlie Shavers.
You're on the Monitor Beacon.
In just a moment, a complete news resume of this last week of 1961.
And now, noted Washington columnist Drew Pearson.
I have reported danger signals from various parts of the country of cold's contagion. In my business, I can't afford colds. I have to meet a deadline every day. Infectious germs in mouth and throat can really swarm into action, increase a cold's discomfort, make the cold drag on. So fight cold's contagion with Listerine antiseptic, because Listerine kills germs on contact by millions.
Let's pause now for a look at some of the most important events of the last week of 1961, particularly those events which will continue to occupy the world's attention in the new year. The last days of 1961 have not been cheerful ones. The United Nations staggered under their impact. The leaders of the Western world spent the last days of the year worrying about how to prevent many small wars from growing into big ones. In the Congo, the fighting stopped temporarily while Katanga's recalcitrant President Chombe backed and filled on his agreement to submit to the authority of the Central Congolese government. Chombe did take the first step the agreement calls for, sending a few Katanga legislators to sit with the Central Parliament in Leopoldville. But Chombe's cabinet refused to ratify the agreement, and this gives him an excuse not to honor it if he chooses. The noise of another small war, India's attack on Goa, reverberated in the corridors of the UN during the week. Because the UN could not stop the attack, some observers predicted the world organization would collapse like the old League of Nations. Adverse world reaction caused Indian Prime Minister Nehru to explain himself at a news conference during the week. Nehru said he knew he would probably be called a hypocrite, but his New Year message to the world was, work for peace. In southeast of India, Indonesia's Sukarno would like to take over West New Guinea from the Dutch. Immediately after India's attack on Goa, Sukarno threatened to use force to take over New Guinea. But during this past week, the first tentative steps were taken toward negotiating Sukarno's demands. In Laos, the carefully arranged and long-awaited conference of the three princes fell apart in less than an hour on Wednesday. They were to have set up a coalition government of communist, neutralist, and pro-Westerners, designed to hold the country against communist domination, or at least make it neutral. The communists badly want Laos, and the West wants just as badly for them not to have it. There was, however, one potentially bright spot during the past week. The world heard from General de Gaulle and other French sources that the 8-year-old Algerian war might end soon. Great strides reportedly were taken recently in negotiations with the Algerian rebel government. During the past week, de Gaulle announced plans to bring home much of the French army from Algeria. Relieved of the drain of the Algerian War, France in 1962 will be stronger and a more effective partner in NATO. And here at home, the last week of the old year was unusually quiet. The biggest news was the President's preparation of his major messages to the new Congress beginning next month. The President fixed on a balanced budget of $92 billion for the new fiscal year, $3 billion more than for this year. Mr. Kennedy's legislative program is expected to involve proposals for social reform, which he made during 1961, and Congress is reported to be in no mood for voting much social reform. Well, those are some of the more important events of the last week of 1961, which, as they continue to develop, will help shape our lives during 1962.
Look for the spear and get chewing enjoyment. Look for the spear, get Wrigley's. Fresh, strong, lively, long-lasting too. You say Wrigley's is great to chew. Look for the spear and get chewing enjoyment.
With the biggest little treat in all the land.
Get the package with the spear and you'll know enjoyment's here. Be sure it's Wrigley's gum.
Friends, the word spearmint cannot be trademarked, so there are many spearmint gums on the market. To be sure of getting the original Wrigley spearmint, look for the spear on the package. It is the Wrigley trademark. Some people call it a spear, some call it an arrow. Whichever you call it, it is the Wrigley trademark and is your guarantee of real chewing enjoyment. So remember.
Get the package with the spear and you'll know enjoyment's here. Be sure it's Wrigley's gum.
Throughout the weekend, Monitor has been looking ahead into 1962, trying to predict what is going to happen in this year ahead. Our economy, labor, space, the problems of the State Department, these are just some of the subjects we've delved into throughout the weekend. Now on Projection 62, here is NBC White House correspondent Ray Scherer to talk about the problems the President will have to deal with in 1962 and the goals he hopes to accomplish. Ray?
Well, Frank, if you'll just turn on your radio and give it a good listen at 30 minutes past noon on the 11th of January, you will get a precise idea what John F. Kennedy hopes to accomplish in 1962. For this is the hour he is to give his State of the Union message. The forecasts are that the four things he is most interested in for the year are, 1, a liberalized trade program, 2, medical care for the aged under Social Security, 3, a school aid bill, and 4, revising the tax laws. Not one of these will be easy to get from Congress. As it looks now, the most important issue of the bunch is trade policy. Some of the president's advisers have told him Congress is not ready to make any sweeping changes here. Other advisers have told the president to tread easy, to wait another year. The president's feeling is that the fight must be joined sometime. If a liberalized trade program won't pass this year, at least a start must be made, the educational process begun. The only thing Washington agrees on at the moment is that it will be a consuming battle. Do we fall back into economic isolation, or do we get out and compete with the rest of the world? The president has taken the initiative. He is selling the program purely in terms of self-interest. Medical care for the elderly under Social Security is the same Kennedy program that was put off in the last session of Congress. Many congressmen still find it unpalatable. There seems to be some hope for a school-building program. Certainly, after last year, the president knows where the pitfalls are. Tax reform is another item the administration talked boldly about a year ago, but it became shunted aside. Well, now in other fields. Over the year, Mr. Kennedy has become a believer in personal diplomacy. If the Russians want to clean up the Berlin situation on reasonable terms, 1962 will find the president at another summit with Khrushchev. So far, Mr. Kennedy has refused to give ground on fundamentals. His Alliance for Progress is off to a hopeful beginning in 4 countries at least: Colombia, Venezuela, Chile, and Ecuador. The president may make another trip below the border in 1962. In matters economic, things have come the administration's way and look reasonably stable for 1962. The tight money period is past. Higher interest rates are the vogue now. The president has promised a balanced budget. He is extremely sensitive to the charge loose spender. The general prosperity, the increased tax take run in his favor. He will have difficulty holding his labor friends in line, however. The president seems to have made no monumental dent with his plea to the unions that they use restraint on wage increases. The civil defense program will remain in something of a muddle. There will be less talk of individual shelters, more emphasis on what the communities can do. $700 million is put aside for this. In short, 1962 will find the president steadier, more experienced, a man more in control of things, a man who can now begin to go out on his own. But a president who will still tell you, if you ask him, Frank, the news will get worse before it gets better. Ray Scherer, NBC White House correspondent.
Thank you, Ray. And the president obviously has a very busy year ahead in what is certainly the busiest job in the world. And, of course, we can only predict some of his problems. Many more are sure to crop up unexpectedly throughout the year. I don't think that's a prediction that we're running any chance in making.
Next, a commercial message.
And now, noted Washington columnist Drew Pearson with an important message.
I have reported danger signals from various parts of the country of coal's contagion and increasing absenteeism from work and school. In my business, I can't afford colds or absenteeism. No matter what happens, I have to meet a deadline every day. Now, infectious germs in your mouth and throat increase a cold's discomfort, can make the cold drag on. But gargling with Listerine antiseptic does a terrific job of killing these germs by millions. In fact, in 12-year tests, thousands of people who gargled with Listerine antiseptic twice daily had fewer, milder colds. So, ladies and gentlemen, on that record, and as a Listerine user, remember, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. To guard against cold's contagion, take a tip from one who knows, and gargle at least twice daily with Listerine antiseptic.
On this New Year's Eve, we're able to bring you a prediction from a famous Italian scientist. He predicts that a new glacial age may come about in 10,000 years. And among the cities that may be buried under 1,000 feet of ice are Moscow, Berlin, and Chicago. And here you are, worried about that snow in your driveway. You know, Monitor is a live program, but some portions are pre-recorded. The time right now in Athens is 2:30 in the morning, and it's 1962.
New Year's Eve in Times Square. Be there tonight on NBC Radio.
WRC News on the half hour. Now speaking from the WRC newsroom, here's Howard Streeter. Former United States Intelligence Chief Allen Dulles says that Fidel Castro's growing military strength helped set the timetable for last April's unsuccessful attempt to overthrow the communist dictator. On NBC's Meet the Press tonight, Dulles denied that the refugee invasion failed through lack of intelligence, and he said the United States never expected it would be followed by a popular uprising in Cuba. President Kennedy has exchanged New Year's greetings with Soviet Premier Khrushchev, with the president reminding the premier of their responsibility for strengthening peace in 1962. The message from Moscow acknowledged that progress toward peace depends on the state of Soviet-American relations. In East Germany, Communist leader Walter Ulbricht called closing of the Berlin border a great victory in the fight for peace. Across the wall, West Berlin Mayor Willy Brandt assured his people they will remain free next year. The President and Mrs. Kennedy called on the President's ailing father, Joseph Kennedy, today at a Palm Beach hospital. After an afternoon cruise on his yacht, the President and his wife joined other members of the family later for dinner and dancing tonight at the Home of Friends in Palm Beach. Commerce Secretary Luther Hodges reports that the national economy gained over 3% this year, and he said he hopes 1962 will show a 4% improvement. Hodges foresees no tax cuts next year and urges caution on any increases in wages and prices. The Kennedy administration reportedly has found a surprising swing of business opinion in favor of the president's major tax goal for 1962, the investment credit plan to increase industry spending on new plants and equipment. Veteran congressmen discount such optimism, but the administration will make a strong pitch for it to spur United States competition with foreign producers. National Democratic Chairman John Bailey predicts the 1962 congressional elections will be a test of political strength between Democrats and what he calls the right-wing extremists of the Republican Party. He accuses the GOP of forming a new political axis with those he calls the reckless radicals of the far right. The traditional New Year's honors list of Britain's Queen Elizabeth was issued tonight. Among lesser lights, the Queen knighted an Army general who fired Konrad Adenauer as mayor of Cologne, Germany, after World War II. Adenauer, now West German chancellor, was accused of not getting reconstruction started fast enough. In the Middle East, an attempt by Arab rightists, supported by 60 Army backers, to seize power in Lebanon was put down in brief battles today in Beirut and in a mountain area. 5 persons were killed. The chief of the right-wing Popular Socialist Party and 50 others were arrested. Reports reaching Baghdad say Kurdish tribesmen in northern Iraq have renewed their rebellion against Iraq Premier Qassam's government. Qassam called the fresh fighting suspicious in view of the tense situation over its claims to the oil-rich sheikhdom of Kuwait. Britain has been hard hit by blizzards which covered the island with deep snow and paralyzed all transport except in the southwest counties. Drifts up to 6 feet blocked roads, London airports were shut down, and trains ran late or not at all. Cold winter continues to plague much of this country east of the Rockies. A new flow of Canadian air fed new snowfalls in the eastern Great Lakes area, with Buffalo and Watertown, New York, hard hit. The National Safety Council has praised United States motorists for holding down the death toll on the highways thus far in the holiday weekend. The latest count of traffic fatalities since 6 o'clock local time Friday is 146. High school and university students, joined by a few adults, picketed the White House today to open a 24-hour vigil and fast in support of disarmament and against nuclear tests. Some of the 50 persons participating are from the Student Peace Union and Peace Action Center in Washington. The weather now for Washington and vicinity: cloudy and not so cold tonight, but light snow beginning later tonight. Cloudy with snow possibly changing to rain before ending Monday. Low tonight in the upper 20s, high Monday in the middle 30s. The current temperature, 36 degrees. Howard Streeter, WRC News.
Listen throughout the weekend for the latest news from the WRC newsroom in Washington.
You have never really tasted seafood until you dine at O'Donnell's Deep Sea Grill.
WRC, WRC-FM, NBC in Washington, 7:35 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
The UN in 1961 and the UN in 1962. That's what we'll be hearing about in this half hour with the help of Secretary General U Thant, his executive assistant, Andrew Cordier, and NBC's Leon Pearson. And, of course, other Monitor features, also brought to you by your Sunday night host, Frank McGee.
As we turn into the new year, the United Nations is in serious trouble. Many voices in this country are demanding that the United States get out of the United Nations. And Ambassador Adlai Stevenson has said that the failure of the UN to take action against the Indian invasion of Goa could result in the sort of impotence which crippled the League of Nations. Well, I'd like to discuss this danger with Leon Pearson, NBC News correspondent and an observer of the United Nations since its inception. Leon, do you think that the blue and white United Nations flag will continue to fly?
Well, Frank, I think it would be a mistake to minimize the danger. The UN is not going to stay there where it is just because it has the physical plant. The UN could collapse before spring, and the buildings could be rented out for office space. I think we should face up to this danger. The support of the UN is too lopsided. It's like a football team with a good halfback and a weak line. The UN depends too much on the United States, which pays about half the costs. And I think everybody recognizes there's a growing disenchantment in this country. If we should pull out, the UN would collapse.
Well, President Kennedy is about to ask Congress for still more money for the United Nations, Leon, $100 million, or half of the new bond issue subscription. Will that be approved, do you think?
I suppose so in the end, but there will be a heated debate, which might be a very good thing.
How do you figure?
Well, it might give some of the non-paying members a little shock. I'm speaking not only of the communists, but the Africans and the Asians. They make up just about half the entire membership, and they're flying pretty high. The Afro-Asians supported or refused to condemn the Indian takeover of Goa. In the Congo, it's the policy of this bloc which is being carried out largely at the expense of the United States.
What's the cost of the Congo operation, Leon?
Frank, it's $10 million a month, and the U.S. pays 47.5%.
Well, Leon, what's your reaction to the fact that France has refused to pay any part of this cost?
I think that is indefensible, an expression of de Gaulle's private pique. It's just as if you said to the U.S. Bureau of Internal Revenue, I don't like some of Mr. Kennedy's policies, so I refuse to pay my taxes.
I don't think it would work, Leon. But if the United States should take that policy...
Oh, that would be a calamity. It must not happen. The United Nations is too much needed in the world. It does too much good in little ways that are not publicized. Eliminating malaria, finding water in arid land, setting up public school programs. And in the big things, the Congo, for example, it well may be that the UN intervention there has prevented a full-scale war over Africa between Russia and the United States. Mm-hmm. But I've got a better answer than my own, Frank. I took a monitor microphone to the 38th floor of the UN building for an interview with Andrew Cordier, a gentleman from Indiana, by the way, who has been with the UN from the beginning, 1945, and he's now undersecretary. I mentioned the dire predictions being made about the future of the UN, and I asked him whether, as we enter the new year, he expected the UN to survive in its present form.
Well, Mr. Pearson, it's a very, very good question and a very pointed one because, as you say, there is quite a bit of discussion along that exact line. My reply to it would be, of course, it will survive. One main reason why it will survive is that it must survive. In other words, we live in a world of multilateral relations. Tens of thousands, millions of contacts of an international character have developed in our generation as a result of the miracle hand of science and technology. We don't live in the 1914 world any longer. We don't even live in the 1940 world. We live in the 1961 world. And that world is one of tens of thousands of interlacing relationships that cannot be dealt with bilaterally, nor can they be dealt with in isolation. Therefore, the only answer is a multilateral approach. The only way in which you can engage in a multilateral approach is through an organization like the United Nations. And therefore, my chief reason for saying that the United Nations will survive is that it must survive. Or, as Mr. Hammarskjöld used to say, if it did not survive, another organization like it would have to be created. And therefore, the question of survival is related really to the question of absolute need.
But it is being menaced, and which do you consider to be the most menacing to the UN, the thunder on the left or the thunder on the right?
Well, it is very, very hard to know which thunder is the more dangerous to the United Nations. I could add several other kinds of thunder. For example, the thunder of indifference, the thunder of misunderstanding, there are many different types of attitudes, political and psychological attitudes, that really are in a way a menace to the United Nations.
But aren't you concerned, Mr. Cordier, with some of the attacks, some of them from very responsible individuals and organizations against the United Nations here in the United States? Or to be specific, what would happen to the UN if the U.S. Congress refused to make appropriations for the U.S. contribution at its present levels?
Well, that would be a very, very serious situation indeed. And that leads me to say also that I very, very much hope that the financial burden of the United Nations can be much more widely dispersed and more widely spread. My own feeling is that while it is not desirable for one country to provide such a large share of the support, that I hope very, very much that this will only be an interim situation and that the support can be more widely spread over the years to come.
I think there are a lot of people who would second that hope. Mr. Cordier, I have one final question. This has to do with the Congo particularly. If you could turn back the clock, here we are at the end of 1961. Suppose you could revert to a year ago. Would you wish that the United Nations could have undertaken the Congo operation, or some Congo operation, on quite different terms, with less military involvement than it has done?
One of the central factors in the Congo, Mr. Pearson, is the fact that, in a certain sense, the ONUC, that is, the force that we have in the Congo, was never geared in such forms as to be a military force. It was, in fact, a peace force in terms of the United Nations Charter, in order to make it possible for a central government to produce, as rapidly as possible, a stable regime. Well, all of that went awry because of the successive political developments in the country, the breakdown of the central government, the non-existence of the central government for so many months, the intervention of external forces, the non-support, or too large a measure of non-support, of the UN action by some of the countries that could very well have provided diplomatic support. Remember that in no case would I criticize individual countries, except in the sense that it is certainly in the interest of the world community to bring the total UN responsibility, particularly on the military side, to an end with all possible speed. What the Congo sorely needs from us is technical assistance, and we'd like to put our money into that field rather than to spend it in a continuing program of military assistance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cordier. Frank, it seems to me that last point, non-support in the Congo, is vital. The UN cannot carry out a gigantic operation of this kind on two cylinders. It's being torn apart. But there's another voice to be heard from, the acting Secretary General U Thant, who, by the way, was elected without the troika harness that the Soviets proposed. Mm-hmm. In this statement, he looks ahead to 1962.
A new year begins today in the life of men and of nations. In the last 12 months, the world has passed through many dangers and difficulties. These dangers and difficulties are still with us as we begin the new year. They are our inheritance from the year just ended and from others still earlier. However, in this new year, we inherit also the knowledge that survival in our times is not possible without cooperation, and that cooperation in turn is possible only given the strength and the will among nations as among men to submit individual interests to the discipline of the larger good. Let us start the new year then with a resolve to advance further, firm in step upon this road. And let us, in so doing, make 1962 the bright beginning of the decade of development so recently and unanimously proclaimed by the representatives of the world assembled in the United Nations.
Frank, a final word. Only yesterday we received a dispatch from Elizabethville saying the UN troops and Katanga police were patrolling the streets together. The forces that have been fighting each other only a few days ago. If this ceasefire can stick and UN forces reduced, then withdrawn, the crisis in the UN will have passed. But I'm holding my breath.
Thank you, Leon, for a most interesting report.
And now, a message from a sponsor.
And now, noted Washington columnist Drew Pearson.
I have reported danger signals from various parts of the country of colds contagion. In my business, I can't afford colds. I have to meet a deadline every day. Infectious germs in mouth and throat can really swarm into action, increase a cold's discomfort, make the cold drag on. So fight cold's contagion with Listerine antiseptic, because Listerine kills germs on contact by millions.
And in these final hours of 1961, you're here on the Monitor Beacon.
Join the big swing to highs. That's where you get all three. Quality, convenience, economy. Get the best, get it fast, get it for less at your nearby highs. There's a highs near you.
For happy holiday entertaining, start with High's Super Rich Eggnog. It's ready to pour and serve, priced at just 69 cents a quart when you buy the half-gallon jug. Be sure to get yours early so you won't be disappointed. And you can stop by High's for everything you need for the weekend. Fresh milk, bread, butter, eggs, baked goods, party snacks, ice cubes, party punch, and many other things you need. That's High's, open all day today until 11 o'clock this evening, open New Year's Day from noon till 8 p.m.
On this New Year's Eve, a prediction that comes from the California Institute of Technology. By the year 2050, the world population will have reached at least 10 billion. But science will have kept pace, and there will be plenty of food, metals, and minerals to go around. Now, isn't that good news? January 1st. It's a day that marks a beginning. But has it spelled hope and peace and a fresh start to mankind year after year? Or perhaps in our hearts, but certainly not in our headlines. Although January 1st is traditionally a slow day for news, the tradition is not quite correct. For if you look back through the years, you can see clearly that many important stories have broken right at the beginning of the year. For instance, January 1st, 1935, everything was in readiness for the opening of the trial the next day of Bruno Hauptmann, accused of the kidnapping and murder of the Lindbergh baby. January 1st, 1941, the RAF struck hard at Italy with raids on Taranto, Naples, and Libya. January 1st, 1942, MacArthur united his lines for a crucial stand in the Philippines. January 1st, 1944, a Russian victory as Soviet troops plunged ahead near Poland and Latvia. January 1st, 1945, our Third Army troops gained up to 6 miles near Bastogne. January 1st, 1949, the troubled government of the Republic of Korea, headed by Syngman Rhee, received full recognition from the United States in the first official act of 1949 by President Truman. January 1st, 1952, the top story was of the heroism of one man. His name was Captain Henrik Kurt Carlson, the only man left aboard the disabled ship, the Flying Enterprise, which was listing heavily in a storm-tossed ocean. January 1st, 1958, there was a revolt against the government of General Jimenez in Venezuela. And January 1st, 1959, another revolt, the results of which we all know today. Batista and his regime fled from Cuba as Castro moved to take power. Yes, that's how the new year began in 1959. New Year's Day of 1961, rebel troops were advancing in Laos. New Year's Day, contrary to tradition, doesn't seem to be a quiet day. It seems to be a day on which the world has made a great deal of news. Maybe someday on New Year's Day, the headlines will really speak of a fresh beginning, of peace, and of man's determination to live together in amity. When those headlines are made, we'll be happy to bring them to you, you may be sure.
A message now from a sponsor.
And now, noted Washington columnist Drew Pearson with an important message.
I have reported danger signals from various parts of the country of coal's contagion and increasing absenteeism from work and school. In my business, I can't afford colds or absenteeism. No matter what happens, I have to meet a deadline every day. Now, infectious germs in your mouth and throat increase a cold's discomfort, can make the cold drag on. But gargling with Listerine antiseptic does a terrific job of killing these germs by millions. In fact, in 12-year tests, thousands of people who gargled with Listerine antiseptic twice daily had fewer, milder colds. So, ladies and gentlemen, on that record, and as a Listerine user, remember, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. To guard against cold's contagion, take a tip from one who knows and gargle at least twice daily with Listerine antiseptic.
A few minutes ago, we got our first word of the new year from London by way of the British Broadcasting Corporation. Right now, in the British Isles, 1962 is just a few minutes old. A snowstorm has complicated things for New Year's Eve revelers, but the crowds in Piccadilly Circus are nevertheless enthusiastic. Here's the report, beginning with Big Ben tolling the beginning of the new year.
Here in Britain, the new year is just 15 minutes old, and in the almost Arctic conditions of snow and ice that we're suffering from, most people chose to drink a toast to it by their own firesides. But in London, there were some who did brave the weather to greet 1962 in traditional fashion in Piccadilly Circus, or Trafalgar Square. And Edward Rayner was at one of them, and he switched on his microphone just as the last minute or so of 1961 was running out.
Well, London didn't get one of those white Christmases the children love, but we're certainly getting a white New Year. Our first snowfall of this winter, and the whole city is wearing white to welcome 1962. But the snow's also cut down some of the enthusiasm of that welcome. The weather experts haven't recorded a colder New Year's Eve. Road conditions are treacherous, and the railways have advised would-be revelers not to make their usual journey to this favourite spot here at Piccadilly. And even Big Ben down at Westminster was in trouble today. The famous clock stopped chiming, but they're hoping it'll recover in time to chime this old year out and the new one in. Looking down now, the crowds here in Piccadilly are very much sparser than we've come to expect. Usually we've got thousands here waiting to celebrate this new year coming in. Now there's just a few hundred below me. a few balloons, plenty of policemen, but nothing much for them to do at the moment as we wait for 1962.
And may we say to all the people who are already living in 1962, a very happy New Year. We're still in 1961, but we're planning to catch up very soon. Britain, of course, has been hard hit by blizzards, which covered the island with deep snow and paralyzed all transport, except in the southwest. Drifts up to 6 feet block some of the roads, and London airports are shut down, and trains are running late or not running at all. And now a quick story from the news. And this one comes from South Africa, where season ticket holders on a small local line have made a somewhat unusual complaint to the railroad management. Normally, the 7:30 train runs from 15 to 30 minutes late, and the passengers have come to make due allowance for this. But one recent morning, the train was on time, and about half the regular passengers missed it. Well, the passengers have petitioned the railroad not to have the train run on time again. It isn't fair. And here's an unusual announcement. Monitor is partly pre-recorded.
UCLA meets Minnesota in the Rose Bowl tomorrow on NBC.
American scientists at Cape Canaveral are preparing to launch our first manned orbital flight, expected to take place in mid-January. But Soviet scientists are also predicting new gains in their program for the new year. For a report, here is Russ Jones in Moscow.
According to articles in the Soviet press, Soviet scientists are working on plans to land an unmanned spacecraft on the moon. Later, according to these experts, a manned Sputnik will land there. And finally, spaceships will be sent to Mars, Venus, and other planets of the solar system. However, neither of the articles appearing in Pravda and Izvestia set any timetable for the flight. They say only that they will happen in the not-too-distant future. Other items on the Soviet space calendar are much like the projects already developed or being completed by American scientists. They include satellites for the relay of television and radio broadcasts, weather observation, and aids to the navigation of ships and planes. Neither of the articles gives any hint that a space shot or even a new orbital flight is in the making for the near future. Russell Jones, NBC News, Moscow.
Queen Elizabeth tonight honored more than 2,000 Britons and other citizens of the British Commonwealth. It was the semi-annual honors list of the Queen. Barons and knights were created, while lesser honors went to others who range in occupation from wine testers to opera singers. London itself welcomed the new year as an unprecedented 3 inches of snow blanketed the city. Road and rail traffic is almost completely stopped, and the London airport is closed after workers gave up trying to clear the runways. Weather here in the United States for New Year's Eve is generally good. Some parts of upper New York State, however, are digging out of more than 2 feet of snow. Weather was seasonably warm in Florida again, and in Palm Beach, President Kennedy took advantage of the thaw by fishing for 20 minutes. Robert Gorelski, NBC News, Washington.
Now, Phillips Milk of Magnesia comes in a new mint-flavored form. So pleasant tasting, even children take it willingly. And it costs no more than regular Phillips. Used as a laxative, new mint-flavored Phillips, like regular Phillips, gives more complete relief than single-purpose preparations, for it relieves both irregularity and any accompanying acid indigestion. And as an antacid, Phillips settles upset stomach in seconds. Get flavored Phillips Milk of Magnesia today. This has been Monitor News. Listen again on the hour for Monitor News, brought to you by mint-flavored Phillips tablets for fast relief from acid indigestion. Do you know how incredibly difficult getting through roadblocks has been for correspondents working in the Congo? Well, that's just one of the questions we'll have answered here in this half hour of Monitor. And if the question in your mind is, who is your host in this half hour? Here's the answer to that question: Frank McGee.
Well, we've done it again. The world has reached the end of another year, and we're about to greet the coming of 1962 with hope, as the ever-hopeful race of mankind has always greeted the future. New Year's Eve, it's a distinctive night, and looking back through the years, you probably can remember how you spent many of them, whom you were with, what you did. But can you remember the state of the world in general on different New Year's Eves in the past? For instance, New Year's Eve, 1945. How different the world was. How much has happened to us in the 16 years since then. The war was over, but there were still casualty lists in the paper. Secretary of State James Burns had just reassured an anxious Congress that the United States had not given atomic bomb secrets to any other country. It was revealed from Hitler's last testament that he had thrown Goering and Himmler out of the Nazi Party because they had sought to make peace with the Allies in the closing days of the war. And the Queen Elizabeth was at sea carrying delegates to the first meeting of the General Assembly of the United Nations scheduled to convene in London. New Year's Eve, 1945. A crowd estimated at 1 million jammed Times Square in the most exuberant New Year's Eve celebration since the coming of 1941. The war was over. This was the thought in the hearts of everyone who cheered and shouted to greet the new year that night.
And this is Times Square in New York City. Ben Grauer reporting from NBC's traditional vantage point for the New Year's Eve celebration, the Hotel Astor. And I'm speaking from a second-floor balcony of the hotel, right on Broadway, about 30 feet above the milling crowd below. I'm measuring the tones of my voice as a measure of competition with the crowd below, because long years of experience here have shown me that loud as this crowd is now, it rises to unbelievable heights when the moment arrives, because the star performer here, of course, is the crowd. And as I look south to 40th Street and north to 46th Street, I can see nothing but a solid mass of people milling around, jam-packed, elbows, shins, knees, body to body, trying to wedge into this center of the city, which is, for the moment, as the clock spins around, the center of world attention. Rockets are flying, yes. One of the youngsters has dared to send up a rocket down on 40th Street, and it just arched in the sky, 40 seconds to go. The pitch picks up. 3 or 4 of them have lit Roman candles. They're burning on sticks above them. Several have shot off firecrackers. 15 seconds to go. The pitch picks up. I'm sure you can sense the almost massive power of that cry. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year!
The war was over. In Japan, Emperor Hirohito disclaimed his divinity and called on Japan to eliminate the evils of the past. The first boatload of bananas in 5 years arrived in Britain. The Lord Mayor of Bristol led a parade to celebrate the arrival of the cargo. And it was announced that the rationing of tires in the United States would end at midnight. New Year's Eve, 1945. Maybe you were looking forward to going to the Rose Bowl game on New Year's Day, to see Alabama's undefeated, untied Crimson Tide battle UCLA's rugged Trojans. Maybe you were at a party, or maybe this was one New Year's Eve when you carried through on your resolution to stay home. Perhaps you listened to the radio, to the Joan Davis Show, to Vox Pop interviews at the United States Naval Hospital in Bethesda, to Information Please, which had Gregory Retoff as a special guest. Or maybe you went to the movies to have a comparatively calm New Year's Eve. You might have seen Ingrid Bergman in one of the 3 big pictures in which she was starring at the time, Spellbound, Saratoga Trunk, or The Bells of St. Mary's, in which she appeared with Bing Crosby. Remember?
Every time you're near a rose, aren't you glad you've got a nose? And if the dawn is fresh with dew, aren't you glad you're you? When a meadowlark appears, aren't you glad you've got 2 ears? And if your heart is singing true, aren't you glad you're you? You can see a summer sky, or touch a friendly hand, or taste an apple pie. Ardent of grammar, but ain't life grand? And when you wake up each morn, aren't you glad that you were born? Think what you got the whole day through. Aren't you glad you're you?
If you were in New York that New Year's Eve, you might have gone to the theater to see Anna Lucasta, Gertrude Nielsen in Follow the Girls, The Song of Norway, or Bloomer Girl, the story of the first suffragettes. Remember the music from that show?
Bright as the rain that falls from above, so real, so right is our love. It came like the spring that breaks through the snow. I can't say what it may bring. I only know.
It's right to believe whatever gave your eyes this glow,
Whatever gave my heart this song can't be wrong.
It's right as the rain
that falls from above
and fills the world with the bloom of love. As rain must fall,
as the day must dawn. This love
must go.
New Year's Eve, 1945. A Bronx couple might have spent most of the evening on the phone calling up their friends. They'd been waiting for a telephone since the beginning of the war, and on New Year's Eve, the telephone company came through. Well, maybe you remember how long you waited for a telephone to be installed. and how elated you were when you finally got one. New Year's Eve, 1945. Were you still overseas? Were you at a party? Or did you stay home that night and listen to the sounds of horns at midnight drifting through your windows? New Year's Eve, 1945. Where were you? What were you doing? Can you remember?
It seems ironic that holiday times, when people are really enjoying themselves, are also the most dangerous times of the year for driving. The National Automobile Dealers Association points out that the combination of winter driving conditions and holiday drinking spells danger. Remember, don't go too fast for road and traffic conditions, and don't drive after drinking.
You're on the monitor beacon. And for 1962, another prediction. Statisticians say that about 3% of the babies who will be born this year in the United States will have red hair.
Monitor Sports, brought to you by Listerine, the antiseptic that kills germs on contact by millions.
And now, noted Washington columnist Drew Pearson with an important message.
I have reported danger signals from various parts of the country of cold's contagion and increasing absenteeism from work and school. In my business, I can't afford colds or absenteeism. No matter what happens, I have to meet a deadline every day. Now, infectious germs in your mouth and throat increase a cold's discomfort, can make the cold drag on. But gargling with Listerine antiseptic does a terrific job of killing these germs by millions. In fact, in 12-year tests, thousands of people who gargled with Listerine antiseptic twice daily had fewer, milder colds. So, ladies and gentlemen, on that record, and as a Listerine user, remember, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. To guard against cold's contagion, take a tip from one who knows, and gargle at least twice daily with Listerine antiseptic.
And now, Mel Allen at the Monitor Sports Desk.
And a Happy New Year to you and to all our Monitor listeners. You know, one of the major surprises of the 1961 college football season was Minnesota, supposedly weakened by the graduation of an All-America guard, an All-Conference center, 2 other regular linemen, and 3 fullbacks. But Murray Warmoth outdid the job that earned him Coach of the Year honors and a national championship in 1960 and put together a 7-2 record. He lost his opening game and his last one. The last one, he had a lot of fellows injured. But, any case, when Ohio State refused a Rose Bowl bid, Minnesota accepted, anxious to try and atone for a defeat last time around. Now, tomorrow, the Gophers and UCLA meet in Pasadena. Here's Warmoth now with Monitor reporter Bob Goggin.
Murray, how are you celebrating the new year?
Well, I'm feeling pretty good. Just a little nervous and waiting for the ball game.
How about the boys on the team? Are they out tonight living it up, or are they going to have to take it easy?
No, I think that they're leading a rather sheltered life.
How does this year's Rose Bowl team compare to last year's squad, your last year's Minnesota squad?
We don't have the depth that we had a year ago, and we're a little bit smaller. We hope we're quicker and a little faster. I think the thing that made us successful this year more than any other one thing was that our juniors of last year coming up to their senior year have made more improvement than any senior ball club I ever had. And so we're a little bit thin and we're a little bit light. But I think that we have a lot of experience and our boys play with quite a lot of poise. And so I think that this is the reason why we were successful this last year. We had very few injuries, and our juniors coming up to their senior year improved a great deal.
Murray, who are the boys who are going to make the difference in terms of the Minnesota squad?
Well, I think that Sandy Stevens has been a spark plug for us all year, and any team that uses a T formation has to have a very capable quarterback. If they don't, they just are not going to win. So our big offensive weapon has been Sandy Stevens' running and his passing. We have a fine receiver in Tom Hall that's caught a number of passes for us. From the defensive aspect, Bobby Bell has been a tremendous football player for us, and we've had fine end play all year. Bill Muncie and Dave Mulholland have given us good defensive halfback play. So if we're able to stop the team, it'll be because our ends play well and because Bell's playing well and our halfbacks are playing well. If we're able to move the ball, it'll be because Sandy Stevens is having a good day.
Murray, are you pretty anxious to avenge last year's defeat at the hands of Washington in the Rose Bowl?
Well, I think that if we were playing Washington, the revenge motive could be a great deal stronger. This team is very happy to play again. I'm very happy that our boys could play again in the Rose Bowl. But, of course, as you know, Billy Barnes and Deke Brackett, members of the UCLA coaching staff, are good friends of mine, and we're teammates of mine.
Buddy.
Yes, I just love them, but friendship ceases when we kick off tomorrow, and I'm sure that they feel the same way. And we'll do our very best to win.
Well, Murray, we wish you lots of luck in tomorrow's game.
Oh, well, thanks a lot, and I'd love to take this opportunity to wish all of the listeners to Monitor a very Happy New Year, and particularly those who are pulling for Minnesota. I want to wish them a Happy New Year.
Thank you, Murray. This is Robert Goggin. Now back to the Monitor Sports Desk and Mel Allen.
Thanks, Bob. And by the way, the Rose Bowl game will be aired tomorrow by NBC Radio and TV. Now, a word from Reader's Digest.
If you're a housewife, perhaps with grown children, who'd like to go back to work, be sure to read The Problem of Women Who Want to Go Back to Work in January Reader's Digest. You'll learn that even if there is a double standard in business, some women can make more money than their male supervisors. This digest article tells about 5 big areas with increasing opportunities for women. Don't miss it. In January Reader's Digest, now on sale.
This is Mel Allen again, reminding you that for the best and most comprehensive sports news, stay tuned to Monitor.
Oh.